My wife cheated, and I uncovered the harsh truth through DNA tests, discovering that none of our 4 children are biologically mine. This revelation has left me utterly devastated and at a complete loss for how to handle the situation. For me, the pain stems not only from the betrayal itself, but also from the realization that my wife no longer wants to be with me. Even more painful is her refusal to provide any explanation for her change of heart. She has been resistant to the idea of moving back in with me, and to my dismay, my mother seems to support her in this decision. To fully appreciate the gravity of this situation, I think it's important to provide some background. I am a 51-year-old man who had to leave my hometown in Texas 13 years ago for work. At the time, my wife Mona was 48, and we had 2 children who are now 23 and 21 years old. They have grown up and are currently living independently in Houston. About 13 to 14 years ago, during the US recession triggered by the housing bubble, my business, which I had inherited from my father, collapsed almost overnight after his passing. I found myself in an overwhelming position, trying to care for my mother, navigate the challenges of raising 2 school-aged children, and support my wife, all while managing life in an unstable economy. After exhausting all our savings, I found that I had no choice but to make the agonizing decision to leave Texas in search of better opportunities. I started exploring prospects in various Asian countries and eventually established my business in Dubai. Although it was a difficult transition, the driving force behind my efforts was the desire to provide for my family. After moving to Dubai, it took over a year before I could return to Texas to visit my family. Since then, I made it a point to visit every 5 to 6 months. I always dreamed of bringing my family to live with me in Dubai, but Mona and the kids were initially reluctant, mainly due to concerns about disrupting their education. Last year, when my youngest daughter finished college and landed a job, I eagerly planned a visit home to spend time with her. During this trip, I suggested to Mona that we consider relocating to Dubai now that the kids had moved out. However, she declined, expressing her fear of leaving my mother alone. I even proposed bringing my mother with us, but both they opposed the idea, citing cultural differences and lifestyle changes that they weren't ready to face. Their concerns were valid, and I respected their wishes, deciding not to push the matter further. During my most recent visit home, I shared my intention to wrap things up in Dubai and return to Texas for good. I had anticipated that this news would excite Mona, but to my surprise, she reacted quite negatively. When I pressed her on why she didn't want us to live together again, she explained that she was content in her current situation but couldn't understand why I would want to leave everything behind. I recognized her point. I had indeed sacrificed a lot to build my life in Dubai over the past 13 years. However, with our children now grown and living their lives independently, I yearned to return to my comfort zone. I tried to reassure her about our financial situation and my plans to establish something solid in Texas, especially considering the improving economy. Despite my efforts, she remained unconvinced, which began to raise red flags for me. Even though I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, my concerns grew increasingly deep. The next morning, my mother unexpectedly stopped by for a visit. She advised me against making any quick decisions regarding my plans to return, indicating that I hadn't shared my intentions with her or anyone else, suggesting that someone had informed her of our conversations. This revelation left me unsettled, and like Mona, my mother's concerns further fueled my self-doubt. I couldn't shake the feeling that I might be making a mistake, leading me to shelve the idea of moving back to Texas. As the weeks passed, I found myself increasingly troubled by Mona's apparent emotional distance from me. Although I understood her reasons, it was heartbreaking to feel so disconnected from her. This distress consumed me to the point that when I returned home, I started reducing the frequency of my calls and texts to her, hoping she might notice and reach out. However, she seemed indifferent to my absence, and there were days when neither of us reached out to the other. Over time, our communication dwindled to purely transactional exchanges, indicating to me that she no longer relied on me emotionally. Last month, feeling the weight of the situation, I confronted her. I asked if she still loved me, only to be met with dismissal. She brushed it off as me overthinking things and claimed she was too busy managing the household and caring for my aging mother. I was left speechless. It felt unusual for a wife to develop such a close bond with her mother-in-law and focus her energy on caring for her. While I appreciated Mona's kindness towards my mother, my unease intensified daily. I struggled to understand why she didn't want me to come home when we had a house together and all our major responsibilities were fulfilled. I reassured her that our lifestyle would remain intact. It was a practical consideration, after all. Yes, I had contemplated the same unsettling possibility that many of you readers might also be pondering. Perhaps she had found someone else. Yet, how could I unearth the truth behind this nagging suspicion? Until that moment, she had displayed no overt signs of infidelity. In fact, she had been an exceptional mother, displaying immense courage as she single-handedly raised our children during my extended absence. The challenges she faced were numerous, but she managed to fulfill her various roles with grace and poise. I often grappled with feelings of guilt for harboring these doubts about her loyalty, but long-distance relationships are notoriously fraught with difficulties and uncertainties. Then came the shocking revelation: Mona had, indeed, been having an affair, and even more devastating was the realization that my mother had known about it all along but chose not to inform me. The betrayal cut deep. It left me questioning why I deserved such a fate, one that unraveled the fabric of my family life. In a fit of determination and sorrow, I arranged a surprise trip home, keeping it a secret from everyone, including my mother, who I thought was my ally in all of this. Upon entering my home, an unsettling dread filled me at the thought of possibly encountering Mona in the presence of her lover. It struck me as somewhat ironic, given the numerous tales I had heard about the complexities and challenges faced by those whose spouses had strayed while deployed. Fortunately, that particular scenario did not unfold when I arrived. As I stepped inside using my spare key, I found Mona in the kitchen. The shock that overtook her was palpable. Her reaction confirmed my worst fears. To disguise the nature of my visit, I had brought along a bouquet of flowers. While she appeared surprised, her expression quickly shifted to one of suspicion. She bombarded me with questions, probing for answers about my unexpected arrival. I explained that I had light work commitments that month, which prompted my decision to come home. Mona managed to muster a smile, but it was a veneer, a forced gesture that failed to mask her underlying apprehension. Over the ensuing weeks, I painstakingly pieced together the truth. The methods I resorted to were not ones I took pride in. I felt cornered and desperate. I rummaged through her phone, listened in on conversations, secretly placed a GPS tracker in her vehicle, and followed her around town. Each piece of information I gathered gradually painted a clearer picture of her life while I was away. It became evident that she had been involved with another man for an astonishing 8 years. Upon my return, Mona exhibited unusual behavior regarding her phone, becoming excessively guarded in a way that was new. In the past, she would routinely cover up any signs of her deceit, but this time, she didn't seem to have the opportunity. My initial attempt to look through her phone on the very first day was unsuccessful, but eventually, when I gained access, I found nothing incriminating, which led me to believe she had erased any evidence at the first chance she got. The affair came to light through the GPS tracking, which allowed me to observe her movements. At first, I didn't think much when I saw her enter a hardware store. However, as I waited for her return, the shop owner locked up, which felt disconcerting. Hours passed before I saw Mona leave, only for the owner to reopen the store shortly after she departed. I contemplated entering the shop to confront her lover, but hesitated, fearing that he would recognize me and thwart my plans. I adopted a patient approach, waiting for her next visit, fixated on the hope of catching them in the act. Typically, she would venture out in the afternoon, sometimes visiting my mother with friends or relatives. This behavior was why I had previously refrained from following her during these outings. It took me longer than I had anticipated to catch them in the act. However, on a particular day, I remained vigilant and witnessed them leaving my mother's house together. Initially, their departure didn't raise any red flags. I assumed they were off to run errands or perhaps go shopping. Yet, something compelled me to follow them, and I soon regretted that decision. They stopped at the same hardware store, and my heart sank when I saw her lover greet them both. Mona and my mother exited the vehicle, and I watched in disbelief as her lover kissed her affectionately. They exchanged brief words before he hugged my mother before she got back in the car and drove away. Mona then accompanied her lover into the shop, and he closed the shutters behind them. My mind struggled to process the enormity of what I was witnessing. To be betrayed by one's spouse is one thing, but to experience such treachery from one's own mother is beyond comprehension. The weight of the truth became suffocating, and I found myself needing a moment to collect my thoughts and catch my breath before proceeding to confront the situation in the shop. My knocks went unanswered initially, but I persisted until her lover finally opened the door. Fueled by a mix of anger and disbelief, I demanded to know where Mona was. He stood there frozen, his expression a mixture of disbelief and confusion as I pushed past him without a second thought. I stormed into the shop, driven by an urgent need to confront the situation unfolding inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the lights flickered ominously and then went out completely, plunging the space into darkness. In the dimness, I heard a faint voice emanating from the storeroom. My heart raced as I hastily rushed toward the sound, my mind racing with unformed thoughts and fears. When I reached the storeroom, the sight before me was shocking. There lay my wife, exposed and in a moment of intimacy that was meant to be private, pleasuring herself while calling out for someone else. The scene struck me like a physical blow, shocking and surreal. Just as I began to process what I was witnessing, another figure lunged at me from the shadows, dragging me backward and pulling me out of the room. The chaos intensified when Mona screamed, her voice echoing in the confined space, amplifying the confusion of the moment. It took a few moments for my mind to catch up with the whirlwind of events. In that time of disorientation, I instinctively struck the intruder, managing to break free from his grasp. By then, Mona had emerged from the storeroom, hastily covering herself, an image that would be forever burned into my memory. I seized her arm, tension radiating between us as I demanded to know how long this affair had been going on. But before she could answer, she pleaded for us to discuss things in private, back at home. Faced with the imminent consequence of the altercation and the need for clarity, I reluctantly backed off. I exited the shop, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, and drove away, my heart heavy with betrayal. My destination was my mother's house. I burst through the door, a tempest of accusations spilling from my lips as I confronted her, convinced that she had been aware of Mona's infidelity all along. My mother's lack of surprise only fueled my anger. Instead of denying any knowledge, she merely cried and held my hand, urging me to calm down. The emotional toll was overwhelming, and I found myself collapsing under the weight of the situation. Soon after, Mona joined us, her presence igniting the embers of my fury anew. I implored both of them to tell me the truth, needing to understand the depths of the betrayal. Mona, after some prodding, finally confessed that during my lengthy absence, she had felt an unbearable loneliness. I had been so consumed with work abroad, toiling for our family's financial security, that I had neglected her emotional needs. The brief phone calls I made had revolved around the mundane concerns of our children and my mother, leaving no room for her feelings. I demanded to know how long this betrayal had been going on, and she admitted, with a sense of shame, that it had likely lasted 7 or 8 years. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. I had sacrificed so much to provide for my family, only to return to find this stark betrayal waiting at home. Confusion flooded my mind as I questioned why she hadn't sought a divorce if our connection had deteriorated so severely. In response, she broke down, reasserting her love for me and insisting that the affair was merely a misguided attempt to alleviate her loneliness, that the other person meant nothing to her. I struggled to believe her words, the sting of betrayal too sharp to dismiss. Turning to my mother, I asked bitterly how I could deserve such treachery from her, my own support system. She wept, imploring me to understand that Mona had been caring for her in my absence. Once the confrontation had reached its limits, I stood to leave. They both tried to stop me, but I warned them not to. I instructed Mona not to return home. I needed time to process everything alone. As I drove back, nausea swept over me, a tumult of conflicting emotions. I questioned everything. Was this affair truly my fault for prioritizing work over my family? The next few days were consumed by an overwhelming sorrow that clung to me like a shadow. Eventually, I decided to drive to Houston to visit my grown daughters. They weren't children anymore, and they deserved to know the truth about their mother's actions while I had been away striving to provide for them. But I also needed to protect myself. The fear that Mona would manipulate our daughters against me loomed large in my mind. When I finally revealed the truth to them, they were devastated. My older daughter, with a discerning eye, even mentioned that she had suspected something was off, hinting at potential issues between Mona and my mother. While my mom's romantic life was no longer my concern, after my father had passed away long ago, her support of Mona felt like a betrayal in itself. The day after that painful revelation, I packed my belongings and returned home, determined to face the fallout of this revelation. Mona and my mother had been trying to reach me incessantly during my absence. I imagined they came home to find an empty house, a stark reminder of the chaos that had ensued. Initially, I left them for 1 month, allowing them to stew in their consequences. Their calls and texts began with apologies, pleading for my return, but as time went on, the tone shifted, revealing a concern about financial stability. I did not block their numbers, preferring to observe their growing panic. I froze my bank accounts and credit cards, watching them spiral into anxiety as they realized they had no income to sustain their lifestyle. In their desperation, they tried everything to reach me, but I remained unresponsive. My mother resorted to emotional manipulation, claiming that my late father would have been heartbroken by my actions. Despite the presence of family and friends surrounding her, she experienced a profound sense of isolation and loneliness. In contrast, I considered myself a true loner, literally disconnected and alone in a foreign country. Although I could have chosen to embrace a similar attitude, I consciously refrained from doing so. My focus was entirely dedicated to the well-being of my family, working diligently with the aim of saving enough money to eventually return home. As the attempts made by my family to reach out to me became increasingly fruitless, they redirected their efforts to my daughter, hoping she could assist. Unbeknownst to Mona, my daughter, I had already confided in her about the truth of my situation, which led to some tension. In her own way, Mona fulfilled my expectations by speaking negatively about me in front of my daughters, accusing me of having severed financial support or engaging in an extramarital affair. However, my older daughter was able to see through Mona's fabrications, confronting her and successfully driving her away that day. Despite this confrontation, Mona persisted in reaching out to my younger daughter, manipulating her innocence to obtain money. Yet, I chose not to intervene in this dynamic, recognizing that my younger daughter was now an adult capable of making her decisions. In addition to Mona's attempts to exploit my younger daughter, my mother had also reached out, seeking financial assistance. At this point, I found myself struggling to move past the feelings of betrayal I had endured. Although the idea of divorce had crossed my mind, I had not yet taken any steps in that direction. A divorce would likely serve Mona's interests, providing her with both financial and personal advantages should she wish to marry someone else. Nevertheless, I refused to pursue that option. Mona was already residing in my house, and that was the extent of what she could derive from me during my absence abroad. The circumstances of our separation and her lack of accountability, whether we were divorced or not, held little significance for me. I was determined to move forward with my life. Following my decision to cut off their financial support, my family exhausted various resources. While my older daughter stood firm in her refusal to assist, the younger one found herself manipulated into providing help. Despite working her first low-paying job, her earnings only just covered her basic needs. Even so, I felt a sense of pride as she managed to save a little to assist her mother. Eventually, the burden became too much for her, prompting her to suggest that Mona should look for employment to support herself. Unfortunately, Mona took this kindness for granted, insisting that it was her daughter's responsibility to care for her. As my younger daughter reached her breaking point, she stopped offering support, realizing that her own limited income could not sustain both her and her mother. It became clear that Mona was pressuring me for a divorce, even going so far as to threaten legal action. Despite these threats, I remained unfazed. Being abroad, I doubted that she possessed the necessary resources or legal knowledge to pursue such action across international borders. Furthermore, in the country where I currently resided, there were no legal repercussions for abandoning a cheating spouse, making her claims seem almost futile. Currently, Mona has secured a position in her partner's shop, although I remain uncertain about the nature of her compensation, whether it be monetary or otherwise. This partner does not even have a stable living situation, residing in a camper, and his financial circumstances seemingly lack the capacity to adequately support Mona. When it comes to my mother, I sometimes wrestle with feelings of guilt regarding my decision to cut her off. There are moments when I contemplate extending a helping hand, but I remind myself that she receives a pension that should suffice for her needs. Ultimately, she brought this situation upon herself. While reconciliation with my mother might be a possibility in the future, the timing is not right. Although she has offered her apologies, they did not convey sincerity. I will wait until she genuinely regrets her actions and my anger has subsided, allowing room for love to return to our relationship. Some individuals have recommended that I move on and immerse myself in the vibrant lifestyle offered by Dubai. However, I have found that the reality of this city is not as glamorous as portrayed on social media. It demands a significant amount of financial resources. Additionally, I am not interested in seeking companionship with other women as a way to cope with my grief. In the meantime, I have been traveling extensively, exploring various places including China and Bali, with plans to visit more Asian countries to immerse myself in their rich cultures. It has been a journey of self-discovery and healing, providing new experiences and a broader perspective on life. As I reflect on my past, I recognize the challenges I have faced in my marriage. I was married to Carolyn for 17 years, believing that our love was genuine and profound. Now, however, I find myself lost, learning that she has been involved in an affair with her boss for the past 6 years. We share 3 children, a 16-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old son, and a delightful 2-year-old girl whom I cherish deeply. My feelings for Carolyn have undeniably shifted as I grapple with the complexities of betrayal and heartache. As a detective sergeant in the police force, I find myself navigating not only the challenges of my professional life but also the trials that come with being a father. Approximately 2 months ago, my youngest daughter experienced an unfortunate accident at daycare. My wife was unable to pick her up due to other commitments, which thrust the responsibility onto my shoulders. Without hesitation, I hopped into my unmarked police car, activating the lights to cut through traffic, a sense of urgency propelling me forward. Upon my arrival at the daycare, I quickly located my daughter, who, despite the circumstances, was only sporting a minor sniffle and happily sucking on a lollipop. She welcomed me with a smile, and after giving her a reassuring kiss, something she relishes, unlike her older siblings who find it more bothersome, I made her giggle, using my usual antics to lift her spirits. However, my moment of relief was short-lived. I turned my attention to the daycare manager, who informed me that my daughter, Gigit, had sustained a significant cut on her calf, prompting the call for an ambulance. I remained by her side, doing my best to keep her entertained and cheerful until the EMTs arrived. They assessed the situation and recommended that she receive stitches at the emergency room. In the midst of this chaos, I tried reaching my wife to inform her and coordinate plans, but my calls went unanswered, landing me in her voicemail. Frustrated, I utilized a locator app on my phone, tracking her device to a hotel just 7 miles away, a location that raised my suspicions. Following Gigit's treatment and the application of stitches, I readied the car seat for our journey to confront my wife. A knot formed in my stomach as we drove toward the hotel, the anticipation of what I might discover weighing heavily on me. As we approached, I spotted my wife, Carolyn, with her boss, Arthur Dash. The sight of them was unsettling. They appeared far too familiar, sharing laughter and intimate gestures that struck a painful chord in me. A kiss exchange between them illuminated the reality of my worst fears. I captured this moment on my dash cam, witnessing Arthur's hand moving with a familiarity that I had never experienced with Carolyn. The contrast was glaring, especially given that she had often expressed her reluctance to wear stockings for my sake. With each passing second, my heart sank further, solidifying the realization that our marriage was crumbling. They shared another affectionate moment before Carolyn departed in her Lincoln Aviator. Just as she pulled away, her brake lights flashed as she came to an abrupt stop. At that inopportune moment, my phone rang again. It was Carolyn. I answered, suppressing any emotion. "Hello, Carolyn," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She inquired about my whereabouts, and I explained that I was at the hospital with our daughter, who was fine. Her response revealed a veneer of nonchalance as she claimed she was on her way. "Drive safely," I replied before ending the call, purposefully ignoring her subsequent attempts to reach me, which went to voicemail. She drove off carelessly, nearly colliding with a truck, and a smirk involuntarily crossed my face as I made my way home. Upon arriving, I gently lifted my sleeping daughter from the car and brought her inside. Opportunity and resolve now took over as I retrieved 4 DNA test kits from my vehicle, carefully taking a swab from Gigit and sealing it in a labeled bag. After ensuring she was settled, I poured myself an iced tea and reached out to my boss to request the remainder of the week off due to family matters. He asked if everything was all right, to which I affirmed, explaining the situation with the kids needed attention. About 20 minutes later, my wife returned home. Just seeing her made my stomach churn, but I steeled myself, counting to 10 to maintain composure. I barely made it to 7 before she burst through the door, clearly agitated and demanding to know where our daughter was. I urged her to calm down, assuring her that Gigit was asleep. Carolyn bypassed me, rushing to our daughter's room. In the meantime, I contemplated the necessary steps ahead, consulting a divorce lawyer, hiring a private investigator, and planning a visit to an electronics store for added measures. Carolyn soon returned, frustration etched across her face as she pressed for details. I explained the situation, informing her that our daughter had a minor cut requiring only 4 stitches, and she would likely heal without any noticeable scars. Her voice escalated as she asked why nobody had contacted her. I calmly relayed that both the daycare and I had attempted to reach her, but each effort had been in vain. Carolyn claimed her phone was off, purposely muted to avoid distractions during a meeting. I noted that she could have switched it to vibrate instead, emphasizing that it could have been much worse for our kids or, heaven forbid, something far more serious involving me. Her complexion shifted, the gravity of my words settling in her mind as she grappled with the implications. At that moment, our 2 older children, Marissa, aged 16, and Craig Jr., aged 12, returned home from school. The tension in the air was palpable as we faced the reality of our situation, a family on the verge of unraveling while desperately trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. They halted in the living room, their eyes shifting towards us, clearly seeking answers about the situation at hand. "Dad," my son inquired, breaking the silence. "What's going on?" I took a moment to gather my thoughts before responding. "Your sister tripped at daycare and hurt herself," I explained. "She needed stitches at the hospital, and I was there with her the entire time." As I finished my explanation, I turned to their mother, my wife. "And you, Mom?" Marissa asked with a hint of accusation in her voice, seeking clarity on her mother's absence during this incident. "I was in a meeting," Carolyn replied, her voice barely above a whisper. It was evident from Marissa's expression that she believed her mother was concealing something, perhaps to protect herself from scrutiny. Craig, affectionately referred to as Junior, stared at Carolyn with disbelief etched across his face. "Really, Mom?" he questioned, his tone sharp, showcasing his concern and disappointment. Carolyn, visibly uncomfortable, felt the heat rising to her cheeks as her face flushed with embarrassment. I need to take a shower, she said defensively, trying to withdraw from the tension that filled the room. I interjected, feigning ignorance. Didn't you already take one this morning? My question was playful, but it also carried an undercurrent of challenge. Carolyn shot me a glare, an attempt to silence me and perhaps to project her frustration. Drop it, Craig, she snapped, her voice filled with irritation as she stormed upstairs, leaving an uneasy silence in her wake. Glancing at my children, I noticed their expressions mirrored the tension. It's all right, guys, I reassured them, attempting to defuse the situation. It's just a minor argument. Marissa, still unconvinced, remarked, if you say so, Dad, while Junior simply shook his head, clearly not buying the facade of normalcy. To shift our focus away from the discord, I suggested we order some pizza. I placed the order, and within 30 minutes, 2 large pizzas arrived, one topped with pepperoni and the other with mushrooms. The kids eagerly dove into the meal, including little Gig, while we waited for Carolyn to return. When she finally arrived, her demeanor was immediately displeased. I only like anchovies, she exclaimed angrily, a clear indication of her discontent with our dinner choices. I'm sorry, I said, trying to smooth over the situation. She shot me a fiery glare but chose to retreat to the kitchen, seemingly in need of some wine to numb her frustrations. The kids, sensing the tension, exchanged quiet, amused glances, trying to lighten the mood despite their mother's irritation. As Carolyn disappeared from the room in a huff, my older children and I shifted our conversation towards their day at school and other lighter topics. However, the atmosphere had turned cold, as if an icy veil had descended, making the room feel as frigid as the depths of a South Pole winter. It had been 3 long months since our family had been close, and I knew things were about to get even more complicated. The following day, I met with a lawyer to assess my situation and explore my options. Her demeanor was pragmatic, devoid of sympathy for those who had betrayed trust, particularly in the context of marital infidelity. She demonstrated a firm stance, particularly in favor of those in law enforcement, and reminded me that the law in our state does not assign blame to either spouse in divorce proceedings. However, she cautioned that if my wife chose to be uncooperative, I could find myself in a precarious financial position. She urged me to gather as much evidence as possible to strengthen my case, advising that since my wife earned more, the dynamics of financial support might shift against me. With this knowledge in hand, I decided to hire a private investigator I trusted to monitor my wife and her friend, knowing it would be a manageable expense that could yield essential evidence. Following this, I purchased wireless microphones and 3 video cameras from an electronics store, planning to place one in each room that held significance, our bedroom, the living room, and the guest room. When I got home, my next step was to discreetly install a recorder in Carolyn's car, another on a bookcase in the living room, and the last one in our main bedroom. Just then, I received a text from Carolyn, informing me that she would be home late and asking if I could manage the kids until her arrival. I picked up Gig and headed home to prepare dinner. A couple of hours later, my 2 older kids came back from school, and we began discussing our dinner plans. I suggested we have grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, and cream spinach. Marissa responded enthusiastically, agreeing it sounded delicious, but Junior shot me a sly look before asking, "What's Mom having?" I casually replied that Mom could sort out her own dinner, which drew exchanged glances between Marissa and Junior. Then Marissa spoke up, "Dad, we need to have a chat." I braced myself for an earnest discussion, fearing they might deliver a stern lecture. We all retreated to the kitchen to start preparing dinner, and once we were settled, Marissa voiced her concern head-on. "Dad, I think Mom's cheating. She's disrespecting you, and she's never here when we need her." Junior chimed in, agreeing with her sentiment. "We're lucky to have both good looks and brains, no matter who we got them from," he added, attempting to lighten the mood. I paused my culinary duties, feeling the weight of their words. Overwhelmed with emotion, I pulled them in for a tight hug, which was soon joined by their little sister, who exclaimed, "Me too, me." Junior proposed a course of action that I had not initially considered, obtaining cheek swabs for a DNA test. He believed this could potentially clarify some aspects of the complicated situation we found ourselves in. While he made it clear that the results wouldn't alter the feelings I had towards any of them, he was hopeful that it might provide some much-needed insight. His suggestion struck a chord with me, especially given the growing distance I felt from her. Although I felt a jolt of shock at the thought, a sense of pity for them washed over me. I agreed, albeit reluctantly, we would collect the cheek swabs before she returned home. I gathered the cheek swabs from both Junior and myself, methodically packing them into my briefcase. The following day, I took them to an external laboratory and requested expedited analysis, understanding that the urgency would incur a higher fee but feeling compelled to hasten the process. About a week and a half later, the lab results arrived. The harsh truth was revealed: none of the children were biologically mine. This information sat heavily on my shoulders. Amidst this turmoil, her company was preparing for the annual Independence Day celebration at the boss's residence, an event I was reluctant to attend. However, I was informed that my presence was necessary due to her significant role in sales at her company. By this time, I had amassed a considerable amount of evidence against her: tapes, photographs, recordings, receipts, and, of course, the DNA test results. I remained unsure of how or when was the appropriate moment to confront her with what I had uncovered. The weight of the impending confrontation loomed over me, and I felt as though I was destined to lose in any scenario. Yet, I still decided to accompany her to the celebration. Upon arrival just after 11 a.m., I learned that the event was not intended for families, which meant that the kids would not be in attendance. In retrospect, this may have been a blessing in disguise, as it allowed me to focus on the gathering without family distractions. We stepped inside, where we each grabbed a drink, white wine for her and beer for me. She wore a striking yellow sundress, adorned without a bra, complemented by high heels and a shawl. She looked beautiful, and I found myself wanting to stay close. I didn't shadow her every move but maintained a vigilant eye on her throughout the event. As the afternoon unfolded, one of her friends approached, engaging her in conversation before drifting back to the role of host. Once she left, I kept a closer watch on Carolyn. With each glass of wine she consumed, I could see her losing her grip on sobriety and her awareness began to fade. It concerned me, especially since she was not her best self without alcohol and was approaching her limit. I noticed her take another glass of wine and slip away toward the far end of the property, close to the house. While a couple of her work friends attempted to pull my attention away, I discreetly switched from beer to soda, wanting to stay clear-headed in contrast to their intoxication. With a quiet determination, I followed her across the yard as she moved behind the garden shed. The sinking feeling in my stomach intensified as I set down my soda, reached into my pocket for my phone, and activated the video recording feature. I carefully navigated around the shed to avoid being seen and managed to position myself at the back gate. At that moment, I caught sight of my wife in a compromising position, her dress pulled down, exposing herself to the light and air, and making suggestive noises. An idea sparked in my mind, and I felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected opportunity. I momentarily halted the recording and took several photographs instead. In an impulsive rush of emotions, I confronted the man with her. Grabbing him by his ridiculous hair bun, I yanked him away from her and landed a solid punch, hearing the sickening crack as it broke his nose and cheekbone. The force of the blow injured my hand, but adrenaline surged through me. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Carolyn slumped against the shed, visibly shaken. Quickly, I handcuffed the man to a nearby fence post, declaring that he was under arrest for the offenses I had witnessed. As I began reading him his rights, Carolyn's screams pierced the air, demanding to know what I was doing. I calmly informed her that this was a serious matter, making it clear that I possessed video evidence, photos, detailed records, and overwhelming DNA evidence showing the children were not biologically mine. I emphasized the importance of her cooperation, warning her that failure to do so could result in her losing all contact with her children. The color drained from Carolyn's face as the reality of the situation settled in. She slumped to the ground, overwhelmed and in disbelief. I helped her to her feet and wrapped her in her shawl, reiterating the gravity of the circumstances. In a faint voice, she asked for her undergarments, the weight of the moment leaving her fragile and vulnerable. I pointed out to her that just moments ago, she hadn't needed any support, yet here we were in this alarming situation. It felt crucial to leave the evidence intact for the investigators who would soon arrive. Despite her cries and evident difficulty breathing, I assisted her in standing upright. We began to make our way toward the patio, where the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The party guests, who were earlier filled with laughter and conversation, now turned silent, their expressions morphing into ones of disbelief and shock. They instinctively parted to create a path for us, their eyes filled with concern as I helped her toward an empty lounge chair, where she could sit down. As she settled, her two inebriated friends rushed over with a sense of urgency, demanding to know the details of what had just transpired. I took a moment to explain the situation, clarifying that it was their boss who had crossed a line and offended her. Donna's reaction was one of disbelief, her voice rising in indignation, while Laura expressed her shock, revealing that they had been under the impression that Caroline was in an open marriage, with my consent, no less. I felt the need to set the record straight immediately. I corrected them firmly, stating that this was categorically untrue. Just then, the police arrived on the scene. I led two officers toward the shed, ensuring they would locate the suspect promptly, as I doubted he had grasped the full extent of my initial report. The shift sergeant soon arrived with another officer in tow. I took charge of the situation, instructing them to gather statements and contact details from Donna and Laura to ensure a thorough account of the events. In the midst of this chaos, the suspect's wife pushed her way through the crowd, desperate to understand what had transpired. The sergeant broke the news to her, explaining that her husband had been arrested for his offensive behavior. As she absorbed the information, her temper flared uncontrollably. She attempted to go after Carolyn, who by this time was in a particularly vulnerable state, prompting the police to intervene and hold her back just as the paramedics arrived. I quickly explained the situation to the paramedics, who then placed Carolyn on a stretcher, advising that she be taken to the hospital for a thorough examination. Once they brought Arthur out from the shed, it was evident that he was in rough shape, his face was swollen, and his hands were bound behind him. He made claims that there had been a mutual agreement and that the relationship was consensual, his words only inciting further turmoil when his wife heard him and confronted him with fury. She threatened legal action, her anger palpable, and was restrained once more. I accompanied the paramedics to the hospital, where I filled out the necessary paperwork for Carolyn, as she was technically still my wife at that moment. Afterward, my next stop was the police station to file an official report against Arthur. Since it was the weekend, he wouldn't see a judge until Monday. He attempted to reach out to his lawyer, but by that time, his wife had already taken decisive action. Returning to the hospital, I visited Carolyn, who was clearly having a difficult day. Her appearance reflected her distress, and while she lit up a bit upon seeing me, that spark was quickly replaced by fear as she noticed my expression. I confronted her directly about the duration of her affair, demanding the truth. Tears flowed as she broke down, admitting it was a brief fling that had spiraled out of control. Anger surged within me as I moved closer, reminding her that none of our children were biologically mine and questioning her choices after 17 years of shared life. Her tears shifted dramatically, transforming into a smug expression as she wiped her eyes and announced, "Because I can have any man I want, and you're clueless." Witnessing my soon-to-be ex-wife exhibit such callousness shattered something deep within me. My expression hardened as I looked through her, compelling her to feel the weight of my disappointment. It was as though she visibly aged in that moment, retreating into herself and questioning her own actions. Taking her by the arm, I led her to our car and assisted her into the passenger seat before driving to her parents' home. As we traveled, she stared blankly out the window. Upon our arrival, she expressed confusion and a desire to return home, which I dismissed. I helped her out of the car and walked her to the front door. After ringing the bell, her father answered, and I informed him that his daughter needed to stay with him for a little while. I explained that I would return the next day to provide more details, mentioning her hospital visit and asking for his assistance. He looked puzzled by the sudden development, but I felt no need for further discussion and left after turning off my phone. Back home, I faced the difficult task of addressing our children's inquiries about their mother's absence. I told them she would be staying with her grandparents for a while and shared a simplified version of the events, omitting the more distressing details. The children were understandably upset, yet they grasped my decision, even if they struggled to comprehend their mother's choices. In the following hours, I gathered all the evidence I had collected against Carolyn, including recorded accounts and the DNA test results. I meticulously prepared 4 copies of this evidence, ready to confront the reality of the situation and the implications it held for our family's future. The investigation revealed critical DNA findings that illuminated the truth behind the questions surrounding my daughter's paternity. Armed with this conclusive evidence, I made the decision to contact my attorney promptly to initiate divorce proceedings. Furthermore, I sought a restraining order based on the implications of the findings, which I shared with my legal representative to support my case. After laying the groundwork for my legal strategy, I visited the husband of the woman involved with my wife, aiming to discuss the troubling situation concerning his wife, Lorna. In our conversation, I expressed my regret for the disturbance that had arisen due to the revelations about my wife's infidelity. Despite the emotional turmoil, Lorna displayed kindness and empathy, understanding the complexity of our shared predicament. I provided her with the documentation I had prepared, suggesting she utilize the information as she deemed appropriate. While she appeared overwhelmed by the situation, she nonetheless expressed her gratitude for my transparency. Following that difficult conversation, I returned home, making a significant stop at my wife's parents' house. It was important for me to inform my future ex-father-in-law about the serious issues affecting his daughter, urging him to seek help for her potentially destructive behavior. I handed him another set of documents that outlined the situation without waiting for a response before leaving, knowing that confronting such family matters was fraught with tension. The next day, we attended church, participating in the routine of life while grappling with the unfolding chaos. Afterward, we went to Denny's for breakfast. I deliberately kept my phone turned off the entire day and night, seeking a brief respite from the escalating stress. On Monday, I returned to work, eager to find out when my wife would be arraigned. I attended the court session where her lawyer claimed the encounter with another man was consensual, attempting to dismiss any allegations of wrongdoing. During the proceedings, 2 women from the party provided statements, yet the judge appeared skeptical about the claims presented. Ultimately, he decided to dismiss the charges conditionally, leaving the door open for reopening the case should new evidence emerge. The man involved left the courtroom with a smug demeanor, but his satisfaction was short-lived as he was served legal papers and a restraining order from his wife's lawyer, a twist of fate that illustrated the unfolding drama. Upon returning home, I meticulously reviewed the results of the forensic examination, the police report, and the DNA findings from the examination kit. These results unequivocally identified the biological father of my supposed daughter, a realization that deepened my resolve to confront the situation head-on. As I was discussing these critical developments with my attorney over the phone, a distinct knock at the door interrupted me. Uniquely, this knock carried an unusual weight, distinct from the common use of the doorbell. When I opened the door, I found my brother-in-law, Anthony, standing there. He was only a few years older than my wife, Carolyn, owned a construction business, and had a reputation for having vague connections to organized crime. A few years back, I had helped him navigate the legal system when his son faced drug charges, helping him secure an effective resolution and subsequent rehabilitation. Recognizing the significance of his visit, I noted that Anthony was warmly welcomed by my children, who held him in high regard. After escaping their enthusiastic embraces, he suggested we talk privately on the back porch. There, he expressed his confusion and concern regarding Carolyn's erratic behavior observed at her parents' home, mentioning how distressed her father had become over the situation. Anthony sought to understand if Carolyn had shared any details with me, particularly in light of her defensiveness when her father referenced the documents I had provided. I realized that he was in the dark regarding the gravity of the situation because his father hadn't shared the documents with him. I took a deep breath and explained the shocking truth. Carolyn had been unfaithful for 17 years, and biologically, none of the children were mine. I expressed my uncertainty regarding the paternity of Marissa and Junior, explaining that Carolyn likely didn't know either. I revealed that the father of G, the youngest child, was her current boss, Arthur Dash, and that Carolyn had contracted gonorrhea and was pregnant, yet the child wasn't mine. I also informed Anthony that Carolyn's father held all the crucial evidence, except for the forensic examination results and the police report, which were securely with my lawyer. As I conveyed this heavy information, I indicated to Anthony that Carolyn would be legally notified within the week. He sat down, visibly shaken by the revelations. He inquired if any possibility of reconciliation existed, but I made it clear there was none. I recounted how the charges against Arthur had been dropped, but explained that he was immediately faced with actions from his wife, which stemmed from the information I provided. I emphasized that my intention was not to cause harm to Carolyn's parents with these harsh truths, but rather to ensure clarity and prevent any misinformation from spreading. Tony recognized the severity of Carolyn's need for psychological support, acknowledging that the circumstances surrounding her situation were indeed shocking. Before taking his leave, he made sure to ask about my strategy for addressing the issue with Arthur. I confessed that I felt utterly perplexed and uncertain, wanting to take decisive action yet acutely aware of the potential repercussions that could arise from any move I made. Tony, looking directly into my eyes with unwavering determination, reassured me that he would take care of the matter at hand. He emphasized that I continued to be considered part of the family and assured me that this situation would not come back to haunt me. He made it clear that while he had no intention of harming his sister, Arthur would undoubtedly face consequences for his actions, describing it as a necessary step to resolve the tensions between us. Despite my reservations, Tony implored me to allow him to proceed as he saw fit, which led him to depart before I could voice any further concerns. In the following days, the gravity of the situation became evident when my wife was officially informed at her parents' home on Thursday. The news overwhelmed her to such a degree that she fainted, requiring hospitalization for a week. Upon her return, her father sought me out, inquiring if there might be any chance for reconciliation. I found his question incredulous, especially given the substantial evidence I had presented. I pointed to the gravity of Carolyn's actions, viewing the matter as a series of significant mistakes rather than mere trivialities. I felt a profound sense of relief that our children were not present to witness the tense exchange between their grandfather and me. As tensions began to ease, I firmly insisted that Carolyn move forward with the divorce, prompting her father to leave, visibly upset by the circumstances. 3 weeks after being notified about the legal proceedings, Carolyn vanished, notably missing an important appointment related to the divorce. It soon came to light that she owned the majority of Dash Realty, a fact that seemed to diminish her concern about the ongoing proceedings. In a strategic shift, she adjusted her legal approach to claim abandonment, which caused further complications and delays in the divorce process, now extending the timeline to a full year due to her pregnancy and a mandatory waiting period of 7 months before a resolution could be reached. During this time, Carolyn's legal team aggressively pursued a more favorable settlement, arguing that she deserved a larger share of our assets. They proposed that she keep the house, along with a 10% financial settlement from our joint savings and her retirement account. Visits between her and the children were limited to every 2 months at her parents' house, with strict rules preventing the presence of male or female friends. Notably, Marissa was excluded from these visits since Carolyn expressed her desire not to see her. In light of the ongoing legal battles, I requested my attorney to arrange a discussion with Carolyn and her lawyer. I arrived early at my attorney's office, setting up a DVD in the projector and grabbing a cup of coffee before the meeting began. When Carolyn and her lawyer finally arrived, her lawyer introduced himself, and Carolyn extended her hand for a handshake. I dismissed her gesture, stating that I was already aware of who she was and saw no need for pleasantries. I offered a stern look to her lawyer when he suggested we maintain a cordial atmosphere, prompting him to falter slightly. As they attempted to negotiate, it quickly became clear that we were at an impasse, with 4 hours passing without any agreement reached. I found myself rejecting all of their proposals while also rescinding some of my previous offers. At one point, Carolyn accused me of being unreasonable, which prompted me to reveal a crucial piece of evidence I had been holding back. I proposed a deal: I would reconsider my stance if she could answer one question truthfully. I pressed play on the DVD, displaying footage from my police car's dash cam that captured Carolyn and her affair partner leaving a hotel, an encounter that she had been completely unaware was recorded. I paused the video at a moment when Carolyn was seen taking out a pair of blue lace underwear, leaving her visibly pale and speechless. I confronted her about the supposed meeting she had claimed to attend and questioned the whereabouts of the underwear she had given me for our anniversary. I made it abundantly clear that unless she agreed to the divorce terms as they stood, I was prepared to take the matter to court, ensuring that the details would be made public. Faced with the weight of the evidence, Carolyn began to cry, and in a moment of desperation, she quickly grabbed a pen and signed all the necessary documents. Her lawyer was taken aback by her sudden compliance, and just as she gathered her purse to leave, her water broke. Panic ensued as she cried out in distress, prompting us to call for an ambulance. She was taken to the hospital, and amidst the chaos, I made sure that my name was not listed on the birth certificate. The baby, a boy weighing 6 pounds and 7 ounces, was born, but subsequent DNA tests confirmed that he was neither mine nor her lover's. The implications of her infidelity became painfully clear, and this revelation allowed me to finalize the divorce, granting me the freedom I had long sought. Suddenly, I found myself quite sought after in the dating scene, with my daughter even making a light-hearted remark about my newfound popularity. At this point in my life, I had gained a reputation as a desirable partner. My son, always wanting to inject humor into any situation, playfully reminded me to tread carefully, hinting that my newfound attractiveness might lead to unwanted attention. It was a light-hearted warning, but it made me ponder the dynamics of dating again. During a visit to my brother-in-law's house, we shared a few beers, enjoying the camaraderie that comes from family gatherings. In a moment of curiosity, I asked him about the whereabouts of my ex-wife's new partner. However, the topic felt loaded, so I quickly shifted the conversation to less sensitive subjects. I ventured out on a few dates, but I soon realized that my heart wasn't truly invested in any of them. The disconnect was palpable and left me feeling somewhat disillusioned with the whole idea of dating. Fast forward 2 years, my brother-in-law Tony and his wife Teresa hosted a lively barbecue, a gathering that included everyone from our extended family, which naturally meant my ex-wife would be there as well. The atmosphere shifted somewhat as the kids maintained a noticeable distance from her and the man she brought along. Despite that, her son was quite charming and effortlessly won over my daughters, displaying a charisma that was hard to ignore. My eldest daughter, now 18, had brought along a boyfriend who seemed to be a good match for her, respectful and well-mannered. I found myself silently approving of him as they interacted. However, my ex-wife's companion appeared to take an unusual interest in my daughter, causing an uncomfortable knot to form in my stomach. The tension escalated, and I was on the verge of intervening when her boyfriend arrived, casually greeting him and diffusing the situation. "Mind your own business, kid. The lady and I were just chatting," the man retorted, dismissively. The boyfriend, unfazed, replied, "Oh, don't worry about me. I'm just making sure she doesn't end up hurting you." His comment quickly took a turn for the worse when he inappropriately touched my ex-wife. Her reaction was swift and fierce. "Take your hands off me," she demanded with authority. Undeterred, he insisted, "Come on, you know you enjoy it." In a scene that unfolded with shocking speed, she struck him in the throat and caught his hand, bending his thumb back with such force that he screamed in pain, drawing everyone's attention. "I didn't inherit my mother's lack of principles, you creep," she declared boldly, and I couldn't help but notice her boyfriend's pride in her defense. "That's my kind of girl," he said, nodding in approval. Just then, my ex-wife rushed over, a flurry of concern on her face, demanding an explanation of the chaos. My brother-in-law, having witnessed everything, stepped in decisively. "I think it's best if you two leave now," he suggested firmly, and upon their departure, the mood at the barbecue settled back into a more relaxed atmosphere. Not long after, a new guest arrived, and my sister-in-law warmly welcomed a striking brunette who immediately captured my attention. She was tall, with a slim figure and long legs, exuding the wholesome charm reminiscent of the classic girl next door. Her hazel eyes, speckled with flecks of gold, added to her breathtaking presence. I felt transfixed, and my son, ever the observant one, gently nudged me in the side. "Dad, stop staring," he said with a teasing smile. Confused, I replied, "What do you mean?" Then my sister-in-law brought the stunning woman over for an introduction. "Craig, meet my sister, Angelina," she said. A wave of realization hit me as I thought, oh no, all the great ones are already taken. She had recently relocated to our area, a mother to a 10-year-old boy, and was looking for a fresh start following her husband's passing. Teresa, with a knowing look, mentioned that she had told Angelina about me, hinting that we might be able to support one another through our respective challenges. Angelina caught my gaze, her expression hopeful, and suggested, "Let's give it a shot." The prospect was intriguing, and in that moment, a spark of possibility ignited within me.